again, YouTube. Welcome to my latest product review. On this, the Ampeg PF500 Bass Head, PF standing for Portaflex, more of that later. Before I start in my typical verbose fashion, I just want to make it clear for those of you who haven't seen my product reviews before, I do go on a bit, right? So a lot of people leave comments on my videos saying, thank you so much for your thorough, comprehensive, all-encompassing review, which is always nice. The odd one or two leaves comments on saying, mate, you've talked far too much, just play the damn thing, or whatever it might be. So, for your benefit, switch off now if you don't want to hear me rambling on for 15-20 minutes about this amp. I'm not going to do lots of sound samples, there will be some, so you can hear what it sounds like, but the review is more to do with the features and functions and a little bit of sort of knowledge about the amp head that you should know if you're going to buy one of these, the pros and cons, etc. It's not so much about how it sounds, although of course that will feature, because what good would a review of an amp be without actually getting to listen what it sounds like. But my approach to these sorts of things is there's loads of sound samples on YouTube and other places. Check out Ampeg TV for a start. Loads of different tone settings and sound samples and all that. So go there if that's what you're looking for. I'm going to tell you about the amp itself and the features and the functionality and all that side of things. So that's the plan anyway. I've no script for this and I've just got in from cutting the lawn, so I'm covered in grass. But forgive me. Anyway, the PF500, it's currently sitting on top, as you can probably see, this Marshall bass stack. So if you ignore all of that, none of that really comes into play except for the very, very bottom bit here, the 15-inch extension cab, because I haven't yet got a proper Ampeg cab, Portaflex cab for the head. I've just got the head for now. So it is going into the 15-inch Marshall extension cab at the bottom of this stack. The top half of the stack's redundant and isn't connected in any way to the Ampeg unit. It's a separate bass amp in its own right. So the head unit, I'm going to take you through the front panel in just a moment, then I'm going to flip it around and show you all the stuff on the back, all the good stuff on the back. You should know before we get into that, there are currently and very, very recently three models in this particular latest Portaflex range from Ampeg. There's the PF350, a 350 watt head with much the same feature set and an aesthetic as this particular unit. It looks very similar, slightly smaller, slightly less features, both on the front end and on the back. You can look those up on the Ampeg website as to what the main differences are. You've got this, the 500 watt version, with some extra features, some extra connections and stuff around the back. And some nice little bits and bobs for live sound use, which I'll talk you through in a moment, and that will be my main use for it, will be live sound with the band. Grounds for Divorce, check us out on my YouTube channel and also on our Facebook page. But more recently, Ampeg released the third model in the range, the PF, the Portaflex 800 head. Now, I'm no real sound engineer and I don't know that much about audio, just what I need to know to play bass in a band. But I've done an awful lot of reading on forums such as the excellent Talk Bass forum, where there's a thread on these things that runs for thousands of posts. I'm sad to say, I'm sad that I've read every single one. So I'm going to let you know what sort of tips and tricks and knowledge I've accrued from all that reading, because it took me weeks to get through it all, but I did get through it. But I'm led to believe from that forum that there's not a huge jump in volume, in overall volume, between the 350 and the 500. Now, I haven't tested this for myself, so I don't know. I'm just telling you what people who have these units and who know a lot more about it than I do, what they're saying on the forums. And these are real musicians who are gigging with these things every day of the week, so I would tend to trust their judgment and their opinions on these sorts of things. So the general consensus is that the PF350 and the PF500, there is only a marginal gain in volume that the thing can put out, because of the way decibels and sound pressure and all that sort of thing works, and the way you need X number of watts to increase the sound by a factor of, and blah blah blah. I won't get into that, beyond the scope of this review. But what you do get with the 500, other than the extra features that I talked about a few moments ago, is an increase in headroom. So you've more space, if you like, in that volume range. This isn't a very good description of headroom, I know, but before things get out of shape, before the thing runs out of steam, and you've nowhere else to go, and you're really hitting the top end of its power output, with the 500 you've got a bigger gap, if you like. You've got more space at the top to push it harder before it starts exhibiting any nasty audio characteristics, like, you know, clipping or distortion or indeed overheating and things like that. So it gives, what the extra wattage gives you essentially is more headroom. Don't be buying it thinking, you know, it's going to be twice as loud or anything like that there, because it's my understanding that's not the case. There's actually not that much noticeable difference between the 350 and the 500 volume wise, which leads me also to believe that the 800 would be similar in terms of, yes, you're going to get more volume, of course you are, from the 500 watt, but what the main benefit to accrue from getting the 800 watt version is another increase in the available headroom that you might need if you're doing lots of loud rocky gigs with a full band. So just have that in your head. 350 is meant to be a very capable unit, perfectly adequate for gigging, depending on your needs, depending on the size of your band and your stage volume and all that kind of thing. And obviously, if you're putting these things through a PA anyway, or miking up an amp, or DIing the bass, or whatever it is you do in particular with your setup, then really you're only using these things for an on-stage monitor, I suppose, volume-wise. So, right, I'm going to shut up talking, and I'm going to take you through the features on the front panel of the amp now. Okay, folks, there she is, the Ampeg PF500 Bass Head. So let's start on the left-hand side and work our way across. First of all, the outside of the unit is metal. It's a steel construction, I think. It's very sturdy, very well put together, I think. Looks great because this is a sort of a matte, brushed, sort of matte effect paint finish on the external casing, and on the top you can probably just see there's the Ampeg logo, which is sort of a gloss finish that stands out from the rest of the casing. You have a silver sort of brushed chrome, I suppose it is, brushed stainless steel finish on the front panel, and then on each end, if I could show you that, there's these sort of ears that jut out, which essentially to protect the front controls. If you put it into a bag or a case or whatever, it's to keep that case off the front controls, to stop them getting damaged in transit, I suppose. So starting on the left hand side, you've got your standard input. Next to that is a little red light with which is a dual function. It indicates when the input is peaking, and it also lights up red when the mute switch is engaged. More of that later. There is in fact the mute switch at the top of those two, sort of these little clicky latching switches. Very nice feel to them, very solid. And then below that you have a minus 15 dB pad switch, which has the effect of reducing your input by 15 decibels if you're using a particularly hot bass that's overloading the input without having to without even touching the gain. It's still coming in too hot, so you can pad down the signal with that switch to make it more manageable for the amp. The next dial is the compressor. Now the compression on this particular unit has a variable ratio from 0 compression down here all the way around to 10:1 compression there. I'm not going to get into compressors and how they work and everything else. You can look that up for yourself, but there's no other adjustable parameters on this particular compressor. You can't adjust the threshold, that's fixed. It's just the ratio. You can have it off altogether, or you can have a variable ratio all the way up to and including 10:1 compression. So it's actually in use, and I have a compressor on the Marshall stack, which I've only used a couple of times, and it's absolutely awful. There's a real audible clicking noise when it's kicking in and out. The compressor on the Ampeg unit is an absolute dream. I think it's brilliant. It's silent in operation, as it should be. It's transparent, and what it does effectively is reduce the transient spikes in your signal and make your sound more even. It reduces the dynamic range, but it also gives you a sort of fatter, warmer sound, as long as you're not compressing it too much, which would have the effect of making it sound fairly flat and dull, I suppose. So the compressor, I normally have it on around sort of that 3 position there, which I'm assuming is about 3:1 compression. So just a bit of compression on there. I'm going to talk about how to set these controls in a moment, because that's quite important with this particular amp if you don't want to run into problems. Next up, you have the gain control, the input gain control, so you can adjust the strength of the input signal coming into the amp, into the preamp, with that gain control there. Next to that, then you have Ampeg's famous ultra high and ultra low switches. Again, you can look up the specs of what that does to the frequencies, but essentially the ultra low boosts the low end, as you would expect, but I think it also scoops the mid-range frequencies as well, and the ultra high boosts the top end. Without getting the manual out, I can't actually remember, but again, that information is easily available on Ampeg's website. So you've got the ultra low and ultra high switches. You can engage both at the same time if you wish, giving you lots of tonal variation, lots of flexibility in your sound, along with the EQ controls here on the preamp. So you have fairly standard stuff, I suppose. You have your bass control here. You then have a mid-range control with a selectable frequency switch here that you can target. Again, the manual tells you what each one of these stands for. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 are the settings. That sort of clicks to each one, and then you adjust. That targets whichever particular frequency the book tells you each one does, and then this mid-range control, then you can adjust by how much they boost or cut. Now, at the 12 o'clock position here, these EQ controls are flat, so there's no cut, there's no boost at all. Past the 12 o'clock position, then you're getting a boost in bass, a boost in mid-range, and under the 12 o'clock position here, you're cutting those particular frequencies. So the reason I mention that is because if, for example, you had the mid-range at the 12 o'clock position and you're clicking this switch and you're not hearing any difference, well, don't be surprised, because you're doing nothing by way of cut or boost. Regardless of what frequencies you have selected here, you're maintaining a neutral position on the mid-range, so you're leaving it flat effectively. So unless you have this engaged one way or the other past the 12 o'clock position, you're not going to notice any difference regardless of what you do with this switch here. Now, moving along to the treble. Again, I'm not going to bore you with that. You should know by now that adjusts your high frequencies in your EQ section. Then you have an FX mix control, which is effectively a blend control for the effects loop that's on the back of this unit. So if you do have outboard effects, processors or whatever, then you can adjust the ratio between the dry, unprocessed, unaffected sound at 0, which is effectively effect loop off, all the way around to 10, which is exactly the same as a full-on effects loop in most standard amps, and anywhere in between. So you can blend in a bit of the dry, unaffected signal, or have it fully on or fully off by using that control, which is quite a nice feature, I think. And on the very end, you have the volume control just there. You have a little yellow fault LED, which lights up when you activate the thermal cutout protection circuit that the amp has, for example. That will indicate that there's a fault, and it will reset itself. You then have a 3.5mm audio in jack for an MP3 player, iPod, etc, etc, and you have a 3.5mm headphone socket as well for silent practice. You do not need a load on this amp in order to use it. In other words, you do not have to have a speaker, an extension cabinet connected to it like you would with a lot of valve amps. So you can throw this in a laptop bag, for example, and take it away with you to a hotel for a couple of nights and sit there with your headphones on and your MP3 player and your bass all plugged into it and twiddle away to your heart's content all evening, and you're not going to annoy anyone else and it's not going to damage the amp. So you don't need a speaker cabinet connected to this unit in order to use the headphone jack there on the front. And because of its size and its weight, it is extremely portable. As I've said, it will fit in a lot of different laptop style cases, soft cases or hard cases. It's very good that way. And the reason actually I got it was because I ride a motorbike all the time, and something quite attractive to me about being able to take a 500 watt bass amp with you in a rucksack on the back of your bike and not have to cart all the gear around, and then use whatever cabinet they have at the venue, or straight DI into the PA in the front of house. Either's good. So that's the reason I got it. As I said at the beginning, it is a 500 watt. It's a Class D. Again, you can look that up, but essentially the two things you need to know, the layman needs to know about Class D, is first of all, Class D power section, that is, first of all, what Class D gets you in terms of benefits is a much smaller, compact package for any given wattage. So you don't need a massive footprint for a 500 watt or even an 800 watt amp head with a Class D power section. It saves you a lot of space. It's more compact because of the way the thing's engineered, and go away and look it up and it will tell you on Wikipedia exactly how the Class D works and why that should be so. What Class D also brings you, and I'll talk about this again in a bit more detail shortly, certain characteristics to do with thermal cutout and all this kind of thing that you need to pay real close attention to, how you set your gain settings on the input on this particular amp to get the best out of it and prevent it from cutting out or going into a thermal overload. Now, I haven't experienced that at all. I've played it quite a lot, but I haven't played it at sort of gig volumes. So it remains to be seen whether or not that's going to happen with me, but I've read an awful lot of reports online about the thing cutting out, but I've also read the solution to it, why it happens and how to avoid it directly from the Ampeg guys. So I'll share that with you shortly when we look at how to use the thing. But before we do that, let's take a look round the back. Okie dokie. This is round the back of the PF500. Again, this is one of the areas where you're going to see some differences in spec between this and the 300. So if we start on the left hand side, you have your standard, what do they call them, IEC bloody power supply, so your kettle lead, anything will fit in there, one of those kettle leads. It doesn't have to be anything special. Next to that, you've got the power switch at the bottom, the red one, and at the top you've got a selectable voltage switch, which means if you're in Europe or the UK or whatever, where I am currently, Ireland, you can use it with no difficulty whatsoever. But if you go over to America or anything like that, where the country uses a different voltage, mains voltage, you can flick that switch over and carry on using your amp. Next to that, then you've got the fan, which some people claim is noisy. I don't particularly think so, but there's the fan there. Moving along then, on the 500 you've got two options for your main speaker out. You've got your Nutrix speak-on connection on the right hand side, and on the left hand side you've got a standard 1/4 inch speaker jack. Now if you're using two cabinets with this, you do have the option of either using a speak-on connection and a 1/4 inch, one to each cabinet, or what is more common if you're using the Portaflex cabinets and getting two of those, is you can use just one of those outputs, probably the speak-on or whatever the cabinets have. I can't even remember now whether it's just 1/4 inch or speak-on, and then daisy chaining them. So you don't have to use, even with two cabinets, you don't have to use both of those outputs. You can just use the one and then come out the back of the cabinet number one into the back of cabinet number two and do it that way, and that will give you the same load for the amp as using the two things together. And it tells you at the bottom there, you probably can't make that out, but it tells you there that this unit is giving you 300 watts at 8 ohms and the full 500 watts at 4 ohms which is the minimum load that the amp will give you. So essentially you could use one 8 ohm speaker giving you 300 watts. You could use one 4 ohm speaker giving you 500 watts, or you could use two 8 ohm speakers which would also give you a 4 ohm load and therefore unlock the full 500 watt gorgeousness. So you have a few options there. It'll work at 8 or 4 ohms and give you 300 and 500 watts respectively. So moving along to this section here, starting with the jacks at the top. On the left hand side you have the jack for the Footswitch. I did get the Footswitch for it, I'll show you that in a moment. You then have the two jacks next to that. You have power amp in and preamp out. So you can patch in an external preamp and just use the power amp section of this this amp head if you want, using the first jack there. Sorry, this one here. Where are we? That one. And then this one here, you can use the preamp section of this amp with all the EQ controls and everything else, and take the signal to a separate power amp away from this and use that instead. So you've got a lot of connectivity options there. You've got a balanced XLR line out here for direct injection into a mixing desk or PA or whatever. You have and then to do with this connection here, you have these three switches here. The top one is a selection between a post EQ or a pre EQ send to the desk or whatever it is you're connecting the XLR to. So you can have it leaving the unit unaffected by the EQ and just let your sound engineer EQ it on the desk, or you can have it post EQ, so it's sending an affected coloured signal out to the desk if you want to more control over your own sound. The next button down, this one here, is another pad switch for the signal out. So in the up position like it is now, that's unaffected. You just get in the 0 dB, just the signal, the standard signal as it leaves the amp, going to the desk. But if it's too hot, if it's clipping your desk or sending out a signal that's difficult to control because it's too hot, you can pad it down with this switch by 40 dB of gain reduction on your XLR, your DI out effectively. So that's quite a handy feature. Depending on the desk you're going to plug into, you may or may not need that. And then at the very bottom you have your standard ground lift toggle switch, which helps you to reduce that ground induced hum that you can pick up sometimes depending on the venue and the equipment that you're using. And if you engage that switch, it will hopefully help in eliminating that. Over here you've got your tuner out, so you can use that for a number of things. The nice thing about it, I guess, is that it's the only output on the back of this thing that is unaffected by the mute switch. So if you engage the mute on the front panel, you're not going to get any sound out of anything except for the tuner, which obviously means you can then tune up in total silence. But you could also use that send, because that's what it is, it's a send, a 1/4 inch send. You could also use that to feed, say, an on-stage monitor or something of that nature, so you can mute effectively the front of house send and just hear yourself through the monitors. That would be another application I could think of for that. And then underneath that, then you have the FX loop controlled by that dial on the front, which I talked about a few moments ago. Send and return for the FX loop. So I'm going to connect everything back up again. I'm going to talk about how you set the gain, the input gain, and the other settings on the amp when you're first getting it set up, and then I'm going to let you hear it. So let's go back around the front. Before we start around the front, actually, while we're here and doing all the connections, there's the Footswitch. It's an Ampeg PF500 is the model number, and it's a two-way Footswitch. Button number 2 on the right with the green LED acts as the mute function, so you can mute on stage using the Footswitch. And button number 1 with the red LED on the left hand side toggles the effects loop on and off. So I suppose essentially it's giving you access to a 2-channel amp with that switch. You could have a clean unaffected signal with the FX loop switched off, and then click that in, and lo and behold, in come all your nice effects. So quite a handy feature to have, the Footswitch, if you're going to gig with this amp. And that just plugs in round the back with the lead provided, the standard 1/4 inch lead provided. Okay, right, crack on. Now I know there's a few of you sitting there salivating, waiting to hear what this thing sounds like. We're nearly there, bear with me. I want to talk, this is really important with this particular amp, certainly following the threads I've been reading on Talk Bass in particular, which is an excellent resource, highly recommend it. Some of the quirks on this particular amp, and I think it affects a number of Class D power amps, the Orange Bass Terror being another example. It's very sensitive to how you set the input gain or the strength of the input signal from your bass. Obviously all basses are different, you've active and passive pickups, etc, etc. So for each different bass you want to plug into this, you need to go through, if you want to avoid the thing cutting out or I know I've never experienced this, but I know people have, and this is advice from Ampeg themselves about how to avoid the thing cutting out as a result of thermal overload or something of that nature. And it's all to do with how you set the input gain. Now, what you need to do, and you need to follow this procedure when you're first setting up your bass with the amp, is obviously plug the thing in and connect it all up. Make sure the compressor is set to 0. So you're setting these with no compression, just the pure signal coming in uncompressed, straight from the bass. You can have the volume to whatever you like, but I'd have it fairly low when you're doing this setup procedure. In fact, you can have it off altogether if you wish, because it doesn't really matter. And what you then want to do is play, whether you're playing with a pick or with fingers or slap or whatever style you play your bass in the way you would normally play it, probably even a little bit harder than you would normally, or you think you would normally play it, because we all get a little bit excited in the heat of battle when there's a gig on and chicks are throwing themselves at our feet. I experienced that many times. Play your bass and start to bring up the gain dial. Bring up the gain dial until the red light, you can see it here, it's actually lit at the minute because I've got the mute switch engaged. As I said at the beginning, it's a dual purpose LED, so it's just telling me that the mute switch is on. Bring up the gain while you're playing until the red light begins to come on, and then just back off ever so slightly, okay? And that's your gain, your input gain set. Now you can run it a little bit hotter than that if you want. What you shouldn't really do, what you're trying to avoid, is that red LED being on constantly. So you can have it coming on, you know, every 3 or 4 seconds, every 5 seconds or something of that nature, flickering on and off. But what you shouldn't have is that on constantly. So if you want a slightly grittier, dirtier, more overdriven sound, whack it up a little bit, but not too much. These dials are very sensitive. Watch the light, and when it starts to activate the peak light, then back off the gain a little bit and you're good to go. And then, and only then, can you bring in your compressor if you wish to use it. You don't have to, but if you want to use it. And that way you're giving the preamp a true, accurate signal from the bass, unaffected by compression settings or anything else for that matter. If you try and set the gain with the compressor engaged, then you're giving a false signal to the preamp. You're giving a compressed signal, and what you run the risk of then is overloading that preamp section and activating the thermal cutout. And if that happens halfway through a song or through a gig, then you're going to be left with no bass sound. Now, when it does cut out, you should know that once the innards of the amp have cooled back down to normal operating temperatures, then the switch does reset itself. There's nothing you have to do as the operator or the user. It does reset itself, but obviously you want to avoid that. So Ampeg advise that procedure whenever you're using it. Now, you only have to go through it once. If you're only using the one bass, you only have to set it up that way once. If you're switching basses and there's a big difference in the output of those basses, then you may need to make a few fine adjustments. But once again, compressor off, volume or whatever you want, but keep it low if you are going to have it on. Play your bass, don't have any, you could even set the EQ flat if you want. I'm not sure that makes any difference actually, because I think that comes after the gain stage, so you probably ignore that. But certainly have your compressor off. Bring up your gain dial until the red light starts to flicker, and then back off ever so slightly. It's not going to damage the thing if the red light's coming on periodically, but you just don't want a constant red, because that's telling you that you're peaking the preamp and overloading it, and you run the risk of clipping and activating the cutout protection circuit. So just bear that in mind with this particular amp. Now, I know a lot of people who have the amp have had no such problems, and I also do appreciate the fact that people on forums would tend to write more or feel compelled to write more when they've experienced a problem, and therefore will be overrepresented in the population of people who have these things, who have no difficulty whatsoever, but just choose not to write about it because everything's working as it should. So bear that in mind. Some people get a bit excited and see all these faults, these problems being reported, particularly in the early days. I think they changed the design later on anyway to make things, to improve the situation. When they first came out, there seemed to be a disproportionate number of people reporting faults. It didn't concern me too much, because there is a way to set the thing up, as I've already said. And again, as I've already said, these people do tend to be overrepresented, I find, in forums of all different sorts. So don't let it worry you. Now, I'm going to play a bit so you can hear it. I'm going to use the Footswitch here to disengage the mute, which is on. I'm going to use my Jack Cassidy, my trusty Jack Cassidy, which I love. And the volume, let's just have a look here what I've got this. So I've just set the gain up, so the compressor's off. I'd normally have that up to sort of 2 or 3 on the notches, which would be what sort of the 9 or 10 o'clock position, I suppose, if you want to use a clock face. The gain is up around the 1, 2 o'clock position on the clock face. There's no ultra high or ultra low engage. I've actually got the figures for you on those switches, and also on the mid-range selector. I'll come to that in a minute, so to say you're going away and looking it all up, I've done the hard work for you, because that's the kind of bloke I am. The volume is up about halfway, so about 12 noon, and it's running into this 15 inches, I've already said, this 15-inch extension cab. Now, I can't remember for the life of me what the power handling is on it, but I know it's a 4-ohm cab. So, in theory, if I was to turn this amp up full, I'd be getting the full 500 watts, but the speaker can't handle that. I think the speaker's a 350 watt or 400 watt extension cab, I can't remember, but it's certainly not 500 watt. So if I whack this thing up full, I'm going to damage the speaker, so I don't do that. But it is a 4-ohm, it's giving a 4-ohm load to the amp, so I'm getting the full 500 watts out of it. I'm actually going to, I've just remembered something else, I'm going to turn it off, and I'm going to turn it back on again, and the reason I'm doing that is so you can see the sort of startup procedure, because again, people who are new to this amp, I've read a few concerns about all these lights come on and the fault light lights up, is that normal? Well, it is normal, and I'm going to show you what happens when you go through the startup cycle. So when you flick it on, various lights come on, including this really sexy purple bar across the top here that stays on permanently. The fault light does come on momentarily. It runs through like a diagnostic check briefly for a second or two, and then you'll get sound out of it. You'll also hear the fan humming away in the background like a computer fan or something like that. So if you watch this, I'm going to turn it on, and you can see what the cycle does. The mute light comes on because I've got the mute switch switched on. So I'm not sure if it does that every time or just if you have the switch on, but anyway. Purple light and yellow light are the things to watch. Hear the fan, and now the yellow light's gone off, indicating all is well, and you can make some noise. So let's have a look. Let's disengage the mute. Yeah, we're in business. There's no, I'm not using the pad on this, no need to. You'd use that more with active pickups, I think, really hot basses, of which this isn't. And let's have a look. The bass is up around 2 o'clock, mid-range is up around 2 o'clock with the frequency voice selected on number 2, I think. Yeah, number 2. Trebles at noon. No effects loop, volume about halfway, so. gives you some idea of some of the settings. A lot of people say it's got that typical Ampeg sound. Now I use an Ampeg, what do you call it, practice amp, 150 watt practice amp up at the rehearsal studios when I'm playing with the band. I love the sound of it, and this is a very similar sound. Hard to describe sound, I find, but a very warm, vintage bass sound. Now it's not a valve amp, but the sound isn't far off, to be quite honest with you. It's very warm, vintage, can get a bit aggressive, a bit biting if you whack the gain up a little bit, but a very nice warm, what people who know more about this than I do would call it the classic Ampeg sound, and this unit certainly has that. I'm going to leave the compressor in the gain where it is. I'm going to, I'll tell you what I'll do, I'll whack the mid-range fully up to 10, so that's a full boost. I'll give you the figures in a minute, but that's a full boost on the mid-range. And I'll start with frequency number 1, which is, I think, 220 Hertz, but I'll come back to that in a minute. Same riff. Hear the difference. To position 3. Up to number 4. And finally up to number 5. Today. Alright, so that gives you the different sounds of the mid-range selector switch, and if I do that full cut on the mid-range, so you're cutting those frequencies as we click the selector up, again you can probably hear quite a pronounced difference between the 5 settings. Scooped mid-range sound with that fully cut, as you would expect, up to position number 3. And then up to number 4. And finally number 5. So this is full mid-range cut on frequency number 5. For is position number 2 with a slight boost up and around sort of 2 o'clock position, and I like the sound that that gives me. Excuse me. What else to tell you? I don't think there's any point really on this review video going through all the different flipping EQ settings, because as I said, they're all on the Ampeg YouTube channel. There's loads of other sound samples on YouTube, and as I said at the beginning, that's not really the purpose of this video. What I did want to tell you about was some of the features which I've done, the way to set the thing up properly, which I've done to avoid any problems, and give you a little taste of what it sounds like. It's bloody loud, let's put it that way. As I said, I've not gigged with it yet. I've not had it at giggable volume levels just in the house here. And bear in mind, this extension cab is not capable of taking the full output from the amp. But it'd be plenty loud enough for I play in a 5-piece rock band, and it'd be plenty loud enough for gigging with the band, no fear whatsoever. And as I said, if you're going into front of house PA support, then you've even less to worry about, because you're only using it for a on-stage monitor. Right, here's some figures for you to save you going away and looking them up yourself, because I love you so much. I'm doing all your legwork. First of all, the ultra-low switch. Right, when you have that switched in, you get a low-end boost at 40 Hertz. So very, very low. If you imagine the human range of hearing is around about 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz. At 40 hertz, you're right really towards the bottom of the spectrum when it comes to human hearing. So you get a 2 decibel boost at 40 hertz with the ultra low switch engaged, but you also at the same time get a 10 dB cut at 500 hertz. So you're coming into the sort of mid-range territory there, well, you're well into mid-range territory there, the lower end of the mid-range territory, but you're getting a 10 dB cut at 500 hertz. That's with the ultra low switch. With the ultra high switch engaged, it only affects the 8 kilohertz frequency band, and you're getting a 9 dB boost at 8 kilohertz. So I don't really want to get into this too much, but as I said, human hearing runs from around 20 hertz to 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz. For reasons I won't go into on this video, the exact midpoint in that range is about 1,000 hertz or 1 kilohertz. The reason for that is because the scale is logarithmic rather than linear. So if you imagine 1,000 hertz is around about the midpoint on the 20 to 20,000 kilohertz frequency spectrum that the human ear can detect. If you're getting a 9 dB boost at 8 kilohertz, you're in the sort of upper mid-range, trebly range there. You can go away and look all this up yourself anyway. There'll be no doubt some people disagreeing and saying no, that's not correct, but that's my understanding. Okay, the bass, as I said, all the EQ controls, when they're in the 12 o'clock noon position, they're flat, no cut, no boost, signal unchanged. So the bass dial, first of all, is giving you a 12 dB boost or a 12 dB cut at 40 hertz. So the same frequency that the ultra low switch is targeting, but obviously then you can vary that minus 12 to plus 12 dB at 40 hertz. Okay, and flat in the middle upright position. The treble, I'll skip to the treble because the mid-range is a little bit more complicated. The treble, you're looking around the 4 kilohertz range, 4,000 hertz, and that's giving you a 15 dB boost or a 20 dB cut in the 4 kilohertz frequency range. And then finally the mid-range control. Right, the mid-range dial is giving you a 10 dB boost or a 20 dB cut at one of the following 5 frequencies decided by this selector switch here, as I've already mentioned. So position number 1 is 220 hertz, position number 2 is 450 hertz, position number 3 is 800 hertz, position 4 is 1.6 kilohertz, and finally position number 5 is 3 kilohertz. So whatever you have that selected at, you can then adjust and either get a 20 dB cut or a 10 dB boost at any of those 5 frequency ranges. I don't think there's anything else to tell you on the figures particularly. No, that's about it for now. Yeah, I think I talked about the compressor. The compressor fully counterclockwise, no compression, fully clockwise compression ratio of 10 to 1. And this says here, the sonic effect of compression is reduced dynamics, increased sustain, and a more consistent output level regardless of how light or how hard the strings are played. And this manual claims that the compressor is very transparent, that is, there is very little effect on the tone of your instrument. And I would certainly agree with that the compressor, certainly compared to the one on the Marshall stack here, is much, much better. I've not compared it to an outboard compressor unit because I don't have one, but it's good enough for gigging with anyway, very usable, so very pleased with it. And to flick that off and just say that for a compact, lightweight, portable head, and bear in mind there's 500 watts available there, ladies and gentlemen, I think, and if you like the Ampeg sound, the classic vintage, warm, gooey Ampeg sound, then it really is an absolute great bit of kit. For recording, you could use just the head straight into a desk or a multi-track recorder. You could take the thing with you in a rucksack or a laptop bag. You can carry it to a gig. The only thing that really is going to limit you on its portability is what extension cabs you may need to use with it. But if you're using, in-ear monitoring, or if you're happy to run with a monitor only mix on the stage and not have your own, your own separate bass amp as well, then you wouldn't need an extension cab. You could just take the head, and that to me is the big appeal of it. I mean, I think it looks class as well, and that's that's a personal thing. I think it looks really nice with the purple light on. It's quite visible from the stage and looks really cool. The cabinets designed to go with that head, the Portaflex range of cabinets, are absolutely gorgeous. They come in a vintage grill cloth, a vintage checkerboard Tolex covering. Some of the cabs, not all of them, so be careful with this, because I didn't realise this till I started reading up on them. Some of the cabs have the flip top head, which this Portaflex range, be it the 350, the 5 or the 800 watt versions, they're all designed that if you get the matching cab, the lid of the cab has 4 latches, and when it's on, normally you have a handle on the top. When you undo the latches and flip it over and do the latches back up again, the idea is that this thing bolts directly to the lid, so it's stored upside down in the cabinet when it's not in use. And when you get to the gig, undo the latches, flip the top, do the latches up again, plug it in, and you're good to go. So and there's room inside the cab as well for your speaker leads and extension leads and guitar leads and all that kind of stuff. So that's what it's designed to do. It's designed to be very portable with or without the cab. So if I get the cash, I probably will go for the 115, the 15-inch Portaflex flip top cab. But I think there's four different sorts. There's a 210. And there's ported and non-ported variants, but just be careful, you know what you're getting into, because some of those don't have the flip top feature. So if you want that, you have to get a certain cab. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is it. That's the Ampeg PF Portaflex 500 watt Class D solid state amp head with all the features explained, and a bit of a step up feature wise from the 350. I don't think you get a compressor on the 350. You only get one speaker out on the back, I think, and you don't get the pad switch for the XLR DI either. So you're a bit more limited on the feature set, and it's slightly smaller. The 500 to me is a nice compromise. The 800 I'd imagine would be an absolute beast if you're doing big gigs. But there you go, highly recommended. Can't rave on about it too much because I haven't gigged with it yet. As I've already said, I can't wait to do a gig with it. And maybe when I do a gig with it, I'll come back and put some comments on this video of how it performed on the night. So I hope that was useful. I'm sorry I go on, I know I do go on, but hopefully it's informative, hopefully you found it useful, and if you did, or even if you didn't, leave some comments down below this video. Check out my other videos for more product reviews of bass guitars, acoustic guitars. There'll be one coming up soon on a Zoom R24 multi-track digital recorder, which I've just got, which we're using for recording now. Keep your eye out for that, subscribe, and you'll get automatically notified when that gets uploaded. And also, please check out our band for the sounds of the Jack Cassidy and the Thunderbird up on the wall there being played live in a 5-piece rock band. We're called Grounds for Divorce. You can see lots of our gigs on this very YouTube channel, and go to facebook.com/Grounds for Divorce Band and give us a like on our Facebook page. We'd really appreciate it. Okay folks, thanks a lot. Signing out.